Carol will monitor the waiting room and let people in as they join, but I don't think they'll miss anything. So let's get started here. So welcome to our January 2022 webinar on the Measuring Distress tool on StatsAmerica. My name is Riley Zipper. I'm a project manager and workforce data analyst here at the IBRC. Carol, would you also monitor people if they are inadvertently unmuted and mute them?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. And yeah, excuse me, sorry. I'm also joined by Carol Rogers, co-director of the Indiana Business Research Center. So I'm going to turn it over to Carol to get us started with what the Measuring Distress tool is, kind of some information about how we've updated it, some refinements we've made in the past year or so. So Carol, thank you.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another in our StatsAmerica webinars. We're really thrilled with the registration and attendance, so there's clearly an appetite for this kind of information. Certainly, I am well known as having a big appetite for data. Sometimes I call myself a data hog. And Indiana is #1 producer of hogs and data. So there you go. What is the Measuring Distress tool? Well, actually, the Measuring Distress tool was built initially, an initial version was built back in the 2000s. I think around 2007, 2008. And the whole idea was to help the US Economic Development Administration ease the pain of people who were applying for grants in obtaining the 24-month unemployment rate for their region or for a county, as well as getting per capita personal income and calculating the important thresholds for distress, which we'll talk about during the use cases. So it was very basic, but it was also very hard for people to do that. Even though the data were available, people could get different results when they were calculating the 24-month rate, depending on which months they were using, whether it was seasonally adjusted or not. It really took the pain out of that. And it also helped EDA regional offices in their grant reviewing process. We've also found over the years that there are many other agencies and organizations that use these distress metrics as a quick way to understand how many areas within a state or a multi-state region have distress based on those two measures. And some use it for different types of grants. We know that some states use it in their community development block grant criteria rather than using just the latest month of unemployment, using an average for that. So it's really helpful. Next slide. So what do we have in the new tool? We have a new way of people accessing the data based on some extensive user experience testing that we have done over the past 12 months or more. And one of the things that many people told us is they really wanted to see the whole US map right in front of them all at once and be able to zoom in. And we added that. And also the ability for them to build their own custom regions. So you can click on multiple counties and get a region. Those counties even don't have to be contiguous. I like to use this map tool to pick out places across the country that may be part of a manufacturing supply chain, supplying certain types of primary metals, plastic products to automotive producers. And so you can put those counties together, whether it's with this tool or the regionalizer tool, and get kind of an abstract region. That's me. That may not be what you want to do with it, but it is flexible that way. You can also do it with census tracts. And we have made the census tract version that we have now much, much better than the previous census tract tool. The map is much easier. The zoom is much better, and you can type in an address to actually get close to where, a location rather, to get close to where you want to be. You can add or subtract counties or census tracts. This is helpful in terms of thinking about your strategy. So if you are thinking about one of the EDA grants and applying to it and thinking about your region, you could pull up your full region initially, but then either add tracts that are counties that are contiguous, or just reduce them until you see which counties in my region are suffering this type of distress, which is their unemployment rate is higher than the US 24-month rate, or their per capita or their per capita income is lower than the US. Riley, next slide. I think I just have one more left. So what's new in this version? Custom region building. You can also just do a bulk data download of all of the latest measures, the 24-month unemployment rate for all regions across the country by going to our new download center. We've redesigned the interface, and due to popular demand, we have now added back in. We took it away because it didn't come up as something people wanted in the user testing. Go figure, right? We talked to the wrong people. So we brought back the prefab regions, so you can type in the name of an economic development district, a metropolitan area, micropolitan area, type in a city, and you can actually get the county that it's part of. And we're also revealing to you today the bare bones of a new demographic report that we want to add to the distress tool. What we'd like is to get feedback from you about the types of things that you would be interested in seeing. So if you are representing an economic development district, an EDA regional office, an economic development group, a nonprofit organization, let us know. What we're thinking is to look at social and economic distress in a downloadable report. You'd see it on the screen, that could cover hopefully more of the stress points that you see in your region that you want data for. You want to be data driven, right? So let us know what you would like to see. We have our own ideas about what would be important there and how we need to expose the metrics, but we want to continue to get feedback from all of our users. And that's what part 3 of this webinar will be about. So we're finished with part 1. Now I'm going to turn it back to Riley for part 2, and you all get to star in part 3. All right, take it away, Riley.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. So as Carol mentioned, we welcome feedback throughout this entire session. I've already seen some messages come through the chat, so please feel free to utilize that throughout. And maybe some questions Carol might be able to answer for you in the chat, but others we'll wait and we'll discuss them. We'll discuss them during the third part of this webinar. So as Carol also mentioned, people have used this tool for a variety of uses. But though the initial inspiration for the tool was to build something that is very purpose-built to help communities determine whether they might be eligible for assistance for certain grants from the US EDA. And so I say that, but I also want to provide a disclaimer in that this presentation, the tool itself, none of it constitutes any kind of investment advice. We encourage you that if you're interested in applying for EDA grants, that you need to communicate with EDA themselves about that. But we want to, provide you a starting point. Is kind of what we consider measuring distress to be, a starting point for having these conversations in your community about grants. So the first use case we're going to talk about is really the most obvious one, is whether your region may meet distress criteria to qualify for certain grants from the EDA. So in the Code of Federal Regulations, in this chapter, there's some specific criteria for applying to these two grants, Public Works and Economic Development and Economic Adjustment Assistance. So we mentioned this on the tool itself, but there's two separate criteria for applying for these grants, for meeting the distress criteria. And that is that for the most recent 24-month period for which the data are available, the unemployment rate of an area should be at least 1 percentage point greater than the national average unemployment rate. Criteria 2 has to do with per capita income. And that is that for the most recent period that data are available, the per capita income of this area should be 80% or less of the national average per capita income. And of course, like there tend to be on some of these types of regulations around applying for assistance, there's a special need criteria as well. Even if your region might not meet those two specific criteria, in consultation with EDA, you might be able to come up with a special need that makes the case for your region to receive assistance. So I'm going to take us to the tool now and give us a little bit of a demo. One second. Okay, you should now be seeing the web browser with the tool pulled up. So first, let me just sort of introduce very briefly how to use it. It's very simple and really pretty self-explanatory. By default, the reference date for the 24-month average unemployment is the most recent month available. Now this defaults to the current month, but that doesn't mean that that 24-month unemployment rate is available for that month. The most recent month is actually November 2021. And if you wanted to look at the calendar of data releases, you can look on this calendar tab, which we'll get to in a little bit. You have the option to zoom to a state if you want to get close up and you want to select a few counties, you can zoom to a state, and then that might help you with that. But I think we mentioned before, there are two different ways you can interact with the tool. You can either click directly on the map to select some counties that you like, or what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in an economic development district that I'm a little familiar with and take you through the distress report for that EDD. So you just start typing and click on the autofill list that comes up, and you will be presented with the counties that are in that region will automatically be selected, and the distress report will pull up without you having to do anything else. And so in this region, these 6 counties, we're looking for a 24-month unemployment rate that is at least 1 percentage point greater than the US. You can see that in this threshold calculation column. None of the counties in here reach this threshold except for Orange County, Indiana. Orange County actually has quite a number of hotels, somewhat of a resort area. And so it's not too much of a surprise that is the region that has a little bit of a higher unemployment rate than the US. But the others, in addition to the region as a whole, are a little bit lower. So there, we also present two different per capita income calculations. One of them is from the BEA, per capita personal income. And you can see up here that this is for 2020. And then the other one is from the American Community Survey, 5-year average per capita money income. You see that this one is from 2019.
Hey, Riley, would
Yes.
you mind if I explained right now, just very quickly for everybody, what the difference is in those?
I was going to, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, then go for it.
Yeah. No, thanks, Carol, for bringing that up and making sure that I do so. But the difference between the two, why you see different numbers, is that the BEA per capita personal income includes cash income, in addition to transfer payments, rent, interest, some other aspects of personal income, whereas the ACS per capita money income only includes cash income. So transfers, dividends, rent, all that is excluded. So that's why you get different. That's why you get different figures between the two. And for more information about the specific data points, you can always refer to the Help tab. And that kind of lays out everything that I said and in much greater detail to let you get a very precise accounting of this. So by default, you should refer to the figure that's most recent. And in that case, that would be the BEA per capita personal income. The ACS, we expect 2020 ACS to be released in March. But as of now, the BEA figure is the most recent. And under this calculation, you see that quite a few of these counties would meet the 80% or less threshold. Really most of them, except for Spencer and Du Bois, would meet that threshold. And even though the numbers are different, the threshold calculation between counties is pretty similar between the two different per capita income measures. But we do list both in case one is more recent than the other. So Carol also mentioned that this is a brand new feature that we actually just released yesterday. We also have a demographic report available. So to switch to that, you just click the little radio button, and this brings up some demographic characteristics about the entire region as a whole. So not the individual counties, but the whole region. So you get population, you get race, and a lot more information about what this community's demographics look like.
Yeah, and one of the comments that we've gotten so far, we've had somebody mention adding historically underserved populations and taking that very literally and flagging those on the report, adding in more percentages. And probably one question I'd like to get an answer from the group, if you don't mind, is do you want us to compare percentages to the US or to the state? And I'd like to see how people would usually use this data. What would you compare it to? Or would you rather compare it to a peer or a competitor? We would like to know. So there's a question for everybody.
Yeah, and please feel free to say your answer in the chat. It looks like a lot of people are saying both, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Giving people the option to compare, whether they want to compare to the state or to the US. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. We'll bring that evidence back to our team of developers.
Yeah, and it doesn't.
Great ideas popping up here. Thank you.
Yeah, nothing beats the instant feedback that we can get through this.
Yeah, where it's just not Riley and me telling them, it's actually dozens or hundreds of people.
Yeah,
it makes a difference to hear from the users.
absolutely. So we mentioned that we also have a redesigned tracts tool. So let's move into that. And I want to specifically focus on Du Bois County because you can see that their unemployment rate is quite low and their per capita income thresholds are also too high to meet these standards, to meet the 80% or less criteria. So I want to see, are there some neighborhoods or census tracts in Du Bois County that might actually meet this threshold, that might actually meet the distress criteria threshold? So there are a couple ways you can interact with the tract tool. I think the easiest would be the map selection. So I'm going to zoom in to Du Bois County. I'm going to hold the shift key. And I'm going to click and drag on this county to select all the tracts in that county. First, I'm going to move over to the drop-down selection to make sure that I only got Du Bois County tracts. So you can see that I did get a couple others. You can easily remove those if you want to only look at Du Bois. Click on Get Data, and you'll get a tract level report for all of the tracts in Du Bois County. So for census tracts, our only data source is the American Community Survey. The BLS does not consistently release tract level unemployment data for all tracts in the country on a consistent basis. So we revert to the ACS for this source. But you can see that the distress report looks about the same. You get the unemployment rate, the per capita money income, and then you get the threshold calculation for each of the tracts. So you can see that for the whole county of Du Bois, the numbers are the same that you would have gotten from the previous screen, but then you can look at the individual tracts and see if any of these tracts on their own might meet criteria for being distressed. And you can see that they all have pretty low unemployment, so they don't meet that criteria. But a few of the tracts have a per capita money income that are 80% or less than the US rate. That's specifically this tract and this tract. So even though the entire county of Du Bois doesn't meet these economic distress criteria, some neighborhoods do, some tracts do. So I think that is still an important finding that can lead you to do more analysis about the project you're seeking funding for. Okay, so let's move back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So on this next slide, the use case is really quite similar, but this tool can it can get at two different things by using the same information. So in the Code of Federal Regulations, there's also a section about seeing whether a region might be able to qualify for designation as an economic development district. And so in this section, you see that on bullet A here, a district organization, a region could be designated as an EDD if that region contains at least one geographic area that is subject to those same economic distress criteria that were set forth in the previous chapter that we discussed. And you have to have a SEDS as well. And you have to do a few other things to qualify for designation as an EDD that I won't get into right here. But I just wanted to mention that this could serve as another starting point for deciding whether your community might want to become an EDD or become part of an EDD. And so I won't go through the whole the thing with the tool again where I present the report, but I just wanted to present this here just for completeness, so you all would know that this tool can also be used for this. And finally, I have more of an abstract use case here, and that is that the measuring distress tool can serve as a starting point for exploring other aspects of distress. So measuring distress as it stands today is limited in that it only considers two aspects of distress: unemployment and income. And those are even more specific: 24 months average unemployment and per capita income. And so it's not likely that your community is only interested in those two aspects of economic distress, high unemployment and low income. Communities might want to consider other aspects: poverty, job quality, education, that contribute to their level of distress. But measuring distress can be a good first step into looking into some other data points that might suggest distress. And we present a couple here that you can use StatsAmerica to access, and that includes our profiles. We have them for states, counties, and towns. And then we have an Anywhere USA, which is a profile for virtually any kind of geography you can think of in the US, from economic development districts, metros, counties, cities. There are a number of other geographies that are included in that, but you can use this tool to look up much of the same data that we presented in that demographic report for virtually any place in the United States. And then finally, we have a tool called the Regionizer, which incorporates some of this custom region building functionality that we have in measuring distress to present some more data that measuring distress doesn't. So I'll just briefly return us to StatsAmerica so I can show you how to access some of those tools. So if you haven't been to StatsAmerica lately, you might have noticed that we've made some changes. You can access all of the tools I mentioned by this little drop-down tools. Specialized tools is where measuring distress lives, and the Regionizer, but you can get to the profiles here. And I also would just encourage you to check out some of these other tools that we have. Some really a lot of hard work has gone into this and to produce some hopefully very interesting and useful tools for you all. And finally, before we get to feedback, I just wanted to talk about some of these other tabs that we have up here. Just kind of talks about the history of the tool, why we developed it. Help is, I think, very useful. And if you haven't used measuring distress before, you can have some instructions about how to use it. And then what I think is really critical here is really specific information about the different data items that we present on the distress report, and the difference between the county tool data and the tract tool data, and then the difference between the two per capita income measures that I briefly touched on earlier. You can see here that the BEA per capita income, this is how it differs. It includes insurance, transfer payments, dividends, etc. And then finally, a little bit of information about how we quality control. And then finally, you can get to the data release calendar. So you can see when specific months of unemployment rate data are to be released on the tool. So our next release is coming up just next week, it looks like. And I said finally, but I just wanted to briefly show you again where you can get to the bulk downloads on the Download Center. You can access that up here for downloads, or at the tab that I was just on. Click StatsAmerica Tools. And then Measuring Distress is the first data set you see. It's a large file, but that's because we give you literally everything. We give you all of those distress measures for counties, states, the US, metropolitan areas, micropolitan areas, all in individual CSV files, dating back to, I believe, 1992. So you can get a very long time series of these indicators if you'd like to.